What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoner's Rift Team's live pod, here to talk about patch 13.22, hitting a live server near you. Let's talk about it. Basically, there are two large sections of things. There is a sweep of Mage and Mage-like auto attacks. There is also a major kit update to Janna, and generic reactive balance changes as expected. Some small systems changes here as well. Let's talk about it. So first things first, a small nudge to brand. The more I've thought about this change after we locked the patch, I don't think this was the perfect set of changes, but I think it's fine. I would have liked to do something a little bit different. Regardless, where we are right now is that brand mid and brand support's observed win rate is about 50.9%. That's fine, that's reasonable. Usually a low agency mage, such as Brand, right? Brand can't really force kills, he's not very assassiny, he's not very fast, he's kind of hard to dodge skill shots. These champions tend to be how do I want to say this? They tend to be allowed to have higher than normal win rates because they're not really in your face. They can't really push their lead. Brand is a fairly low agency champion. Now, I do think there are some larger scope changes we could do that could make Brand higher agency, things like missile speeds and whatever else, but suffice it to say, Brand is a fairly low agency champion. His range is very gated. His mobility is one of the lowest in the game. And so, on a opponent's perception perspective, Brand can be very strong and not feel very frustrating compared to someone like Yasuo or Yone or Zed or Kiana, where if they're strong, they can repeatedly go out and kill you. And they can say, no, I'm ahead, you're going to lose the game. Whereas when Brand's ahead, he'll be good at team fighting, but the team fights still have to show up. And so I do think that it is very reasonable to say that Brand is allowed to have a high win rate. There is absolutely room to debate this and say that you disagree, and that is understandable. But regardless, he is relatively decent, although we think could be stronger, especially in mid lane, and he's already pretty decent in support. We'd like to really make sure that there are alternate roles to support that feel good, that people are willing to play him in, and then kind of take stock. Anyway, to get to the other point though, Brand Jungle is in the mid 49s of observed win rate right now. We, much like Brand Mid, think that we can get Brand Jungle to a strong but not overbearing spot. We think that would be a healthy spot for him. He's, again, a champion whose ganks are very, very fair, whose clear is fast but does not turn into a monster late game carry. There's no, global requiems out here. And so in a world where some champions are going to observe low win rates because they can be frustrating when strong, and we tune them just, on the under 70% win rate, there's a much larger discussion here that I'm not trying to put in this video, but suffice it to say, we think Brand can be at least 50 in the jungle, probably a little bit higher, and so the goal is to get him here. So there's two levers here. One is the monster damage modifier going up a very little bit. We have to be pretty sensitive here. What we observed in internal playtest from internal playtesting of Brand Jungle was that it was very, very easy to get him to a spot where he was just one-shotting camps from the second recall onwards. And so the first number I tried on internal testing was 300%, then we went down to 60, then 250, then we finally landed on 220. We thought he would be pretty good at 220. And to be fair, he was. Again, he has an observed 49.3% win rate in jungle. Gameplay analysis did a really good job getting his magnitude read at. We think this is the right number where he's going to be relatively balanced. And so we technically kind of undershot, but I think this is more than reasonable to say, okay, cool. There's absolutely a play race here for Brand Jungle. The play rate spiked up. The win rate is reasonable. Some people are having a whole lot of fun. And this did not cost me much time to modify a few numbers and get a few playtests on Brand Jungle when there weren't other jungler test points that were taking away playtest resources. Right, it's a very, very efficient set of changes to start this in the first place. So here's some small follow-up. This is, again, we think a relatively delicate lever. If there is negligible win rate gain, we can go a little bit harder here. But committed to say, hey, you might see Brand again in the next patch, but committed to say that we think Brand can be a successful jungler. And players seem to agree as well, which is good. The next change is meant to be a very light reshape of power away from support and into mid and jungle. Really, this is going to be just a buff to mid and jungle and a slightly lesser buff to support. But let's talk about what's happening with configuration. Basically, the rank up incentive is getting better, and the AP ratio getting increased by 10%. There actually was mistakenly last patch a nerf from 55 to 50% AP ratio. We didn't note it. That's my fault. That's my bad. We didn't catch it. Anyway, this actually happened. The AP ratio was 50%. Oh well. Anyway, let's move on to the fact that this happened, and let's talk about this champion, right? So, flashbang warning. Um, Skip this for now. Don't worry about this. But this is like roughly the shape of, if I say, hey, someone has bonus stats, this is kind of the shape of how the stats are going to be used. We talk about item builds in various champion builds. Okay, so first is the change to Brand's passive damage, and we're using red buff as the target here. This is the level of the camp itself. He still caps on the damage at level 10, but hey, the damage per tick is up about 5%. In the early game, that is what you get when you turn 220 to 230. It's about a 5% damage increase, so a little bit more passive damage via Brand. Okay, fine. Again, once the rev is level 10, you don't have a change anyway. Things like third plus dragon and baron easily hit this cap no matter what, so you're not going to have an effect in how fast you kill epic monsters, but hey, a small nudge here, no problem. The second one is to something that doesn't hit the health cap, like the large raptor camp. You never hit the cap, so hey, congratulations, you get that 5% more damage via your passive at all points in time. Okay, great. Next thing though is the math on Brand E itself. This is basically saying, hey, if you're using Doran's Ring and 2 stat shards, so mid lane Brand, this is how much AP you have in the early game. Keep in mind, down by 5 damage plus 10% AP ratio means 50 ability power is the break even. Worth noting that this helps Brand jungle less because he has less AP at level 1. Also, he doesn't learn E until later on. He doesn't learn it until level 3 if he's jungling correctly, so it's not going to affect his first 3 camps. It'll only affect him if he's doing blue through raptors, then that 4th camp, or if he's doing red side up the top side, then it's, you know, the wolf camp up there. But it's also like he's going to do 3 less damage on his E, and he's going to get 2 more damage per tick on the passive. Don't worry, he's not getting a slower clear. That's just not going to happen. But by the time he gets any amount of items at all, he's going to be chilling. Now, it is worth noting, and the reason I chose this as the target here, and I got accepted so we did the changes, is that so mid lane and support Brand get about the same amount of gold as each other, because support Brand takes kills and mid Brand can't farm kills very easily. But of course, mid Brand gets way more XP, and so anything that incentivizes leveling up, right? -5 base plus 15 with rank, -5 base plus 15 with rank. This is lightly mid skewed because the AP ratio is going to be flat between the two, relatively flat between the two. They're both earning AP at a relatively similar amount, but mid Brand is going to level up sooner, and so get the rank of incentive a little bit faster. Mid laners earn on average about 40% more XP than supports do, and so will get to rank 5 this ability more quickly. It's worth noting that Emax second is the less common permutation for support in for support, and is the most common permutation for Brand in mid. We may see supports move over. Regardless, even if supports do move over, Brand mid will enjoy the levels more quickly, so will still be disproportionately buffed, though honestly, I'm going to know false assumptions here that this will not be a small buff to Brand support as well. Again, I do think there are some higher scope reshapes that could be done to skew him away from support and into other roles. I didn't think it was worth it on small notice. This was not like, oh my gosh, Brand is a balance problem. It's just like, hey, we can give him a bit more buffs. There's an audience for Brand jungle. Let's make some changes that we think are going to be jungle skewed. It's worth noting that in addition to the data I talked about with Brand mid and Brand support, Brand jungle earns the most gold of every version of Brand, and gets XP somewhere between what a mid laner gets and what a support gets. So getting the most gold uses the AP ratio the most, and getting more XP than support will still use this buff more than support does. And so again, all these changes would disproportionately buff Brand jungle and Brand mid the most. It'll buff Brand support some, but it will buff it the least. And again, here is the data table on how much damage could be happening on an example mid laner build, and then you can kind of compare the numbers here and how much damage we expect to see out of the example support build. And again, the AP ratio change certainly helps support no matter what. Again, pretty quickly, 50 ability power is all it takes to break even on rank 1. It's still a buff to support. If you have to reshape him out of support to put him back down about 50, we can, of course, but we'll see what this is. We'll see what the numbers end up being. If he's wildly overtuned, we will have to do some nerfs, of course. The hope is that we don't, but over kind of explaining on the Brand changes. Let's move forward. Briar has been an absolutely big winner. We have been tapping her down every patch as people gain mastery in the champion. Her win rates climb via days, and then we bring her back down, and it climbs, and then bring her back down. She's been sitting around 52% win rate for a while. We'd like to bring her in much more, normal situation, closer to 50.5 is probably reasonable for this champion. I don't think Briar needs to be sub 50, but I don't also think she needs to be 52, whereas I think Brand mid is the kind of champion that probably could be 52. Very reasonably, this would be fine. Anyway, Briar lethality has been by far her best performing role, and from my investigation, Lethality Briar is not just, oh, we opt in when we're doing well to play Lethality Briar. Lethality Briar is often a start of game opt-in sort of scenario. This is measured by using Halo Blades as her example keystone and measuring her builds with this keystone. So Halo Blades Briar is easily her best keystone. And of course, you have to pick keystone before the game starts, right? Before you've discovered that you're snowballing. And so when you observe a Halo Blades winner is higher than like a Conqueror or PTA winner. And by the way, Fighter Briar players, PTA is really, really, really good. It fits her combat pattern perfectly. You should run Press the Attack on Briar, run it instead of Conqueror, okay? Okay. But other than that, data really strongly indicates that Halo Blades Briar completely beats Conqueror or PTA Briar. It is more successful and it's more winning. And again, this doesn't have the weird conflation with, well, of course there's no bowling. That's why you went Duskblade or Collector or whatever. And if you look at Halo Blades into fighter items, it is less performant than Halo Blades into lethality items. You account for like time of completion of these items. It's like, no, really, Lethality Briar is the best performing version of this champion. So these nerfs are intended to nerf Lethality Briar. The way we're doing that is by getting rid of some lethality synergies, such as percent armor penetration, and additionally through base spell damages or overall spell damages, because lethality multiply spell damage, whereas something like a Stride Breaker or a Gorge Drinker or a Sterix Gauge does not multiply your spell damage. They can only add to it, and that doesn't really care other than like what your cooldown is, how that's going to be scaled. And so largely went for things that are synergistic with lethality. I don't expect this to bring the builds back to the other way around where fighter becomes her best build. I am fine if they are equally powerful, but they need to be equally powerful, not clearly dominant on the lethality side. So I chose these targets, we got them approved, and so it is an armor reduction nerf after rank 1. It is a flat damage nerf on head rush after rank 1, and it is an R damage nerf via both the AD ratio and a little bit of base damage, which will mean something. So let's talk about that. So here is the base damage, well, accounting for about 210 bonus AD in items, roughly a 4-item build at level 18. Here's how much damage the Q is doing before and after. It's down some. Again, this matters more for lethality, where this full damage gets multiplied via having some armor penetration. Less meaningful here for an auto-attacker. And then similarly, here's how much armor shred is coming through. It's worth noting that, like, roughly 1% armor pen is about 0.5% more damage. It's in that kind of ballpark. So anytime you're using Q, it's going to do 5% less damage, but you're also going to get 1 to 3% less follow-up damage. And that 1 to 3% follow-up damage scales aggressively up with lethality. The more flight lethality you have, the bigger this damage amp actually is. The less lethality you have, the less this shred matters, especially if you're willing to buy something like Black Cleaver. It actually further devalues this. So this re-incentivizes Black Cleaver. It's slightly disincentivizes lethality. Again, I don't expect this to fully swap her builds, but it is directionally the amount of winner magnitude we think we need to remove in a way that hits her best builds and doesn't as strongly hit her less strong builds. And then finally, here's the math on how much damage comes out of the R rocket. Primarily nerfed the bonus AD ratio more than nerfing the base damage here. This is a much larger AD ratio hit. I've spoken a couple times about this. I'm going to reiterate that something I think that I believe is important is that champions have reliably strong ultimates where even if you're not having a great game, at least you can press R and you get something out of it. Yes, I've still nerfed the base damage here somewhat, but it's saying that, hey, when relevant, when it makes sense, can we try to make sure the ultimates have a reliable amount of baseline value that is powerful, and ultimates don't need to be snowbally. Now, there's exceptions here like Crowstorm, where this is the entire point of the character. That's going to have a good AP ratio. Karthus Requiem, kind of a similar boat here. But overall, I think that is useful and worth chasing down. And so directionally, what I'm doing with a lot of ultimates, whenever I retune ultimates, it's feedback I've given to other designers in the team as well. Not as a hard and fast rule, you must do this, but it's the kind of thing where it's probably useful and it's probably worth going in that direction, at least a small degree, though not by like a huge table flip or anything, but just something I think is useful to say, hey, if you're doing really, really poorly, at least you can press R on a long cooldown and get something out of it. And so again, it's more of a nerf to the scaling here of various spells, and look, you still have a pretty solid base damage ulti, where if you're limping along, you're level 13, you don't have much else going for you, at least you have a pretty solid nuke with some AoE fear attached, and maybe it's good enough. But of course, you're still catapulting yourself as Briar. All you can do is auto attack. There is a limit to how bad game proof the R can get, of course. Let's move forward, which is to Dr. Mundo. No special math here. This is just walking back some of the bonus AD on the Mundo E passive. We think this is going to be somewhere in between where we landed in the previous patch. If my memory serves, he gained about 2.5% win rate, roughly from 13.20's anti-snowballing changes, plus nerfs to every keystone that wasn't his. And then in 0.21, we nerfed him and he lost something like 3 1/3. So we want to give back about 1% win rate, something around there. And so we think this is going to be relatively this by walking back about half the nerf. We're walking back about, what is this, 20% of the nerf? I think, if my memory serves correctly, from the previous one, because this was 2 to 4%, became 2 to 3. I think that was correct. So 2 to 4 became 2 to 3, and now it's walking back almost half the nerf. Of course, we're keeping the E active nerf. We're keeping more than half of this change, but we don't want to walk back more than 1/3 of the nerfs, so hence these numbers here. If we're wrong again, apologies. We'll, touch him up a little bit again, but he's likely to stand at a pretty good spot as a result of these changes. Okay, so next is a set of changes to Gragas. This was put in very early into the patch. This was just spawned off the discussion of, hey, the gameplay around max ability haste Gragas is really, really poor. It locks your opponent out from being able to play the game. They just don't get to play the game until they die or someone else stuns you out of this. That is not acceptable. A 75-second long CC chain is not acceptable gameplay in League of Legends. I don't care if it's good. I don't care if it's a meme build. This is unacceptable. This is not allowed to be in the game. I know it's been in the game for a very, very long time. Abilities really shouldn't scale this way. I'm generally not a fan of having abilities hyperscale off of one stat. We talked about this a little bit ago with something like Briar Q, like scaling with lethality, but also there is a cap on how hard this can scale because it can only shred so much armor. The fact that Gragas E was a flat cooldown refund meant that you could bring this cooldown to 0 and just permanently stun someone. This is just not, again, gameplay that should be supported in League of Legends, regardless of actual viability, is just not an acceptable thing. And so it's a very simple change to saying, well, the cooldown refund is going to be % based. It's going to be percentage of the cooldown. You can't get this to 0. It's just not going to be possible. It can't happen unless, I don't know, there's some way to print a million negative tenacity, in which case it comes back, but you have to have like negative 200% tenacity. At that point, our item system is really, really, really different from what it is today, and I'm not worried about that right now. Doing the math for you, though, this is a substantial buff to the cooldown refund on hit. It scales down with ability haste. It requires quite a lot of ability haste. His most common builds do not get this much ability haste. This is basically a strict buff. Not in literally all cases, but this is a win rate positive change, let's be clear. But also Gragas kind of sucks right now, and so we added another buff as well. The point of all these changes is to really convince players who don't do math that no, really, these changes are a buff to Gragas. Your champion is stronger. Go play new Gragas. He's a stronger champion. Some things that we've identified is the fact that jungle Gragas tends to buy less ability haste, and also cares much more about his E cooldown because it is sometimes a core component of his clear speed. When you double the cooldown refund of a core damage ability, this is pretty meaningful, and you get better clear speed out of it. So this certainly does quite a bit. We are acknowledging this is a jungle buff more than a top lane buff. In the short term, that is fine. There certainly could be longer term work on Gragas to un-elite skew him, to un-jungle skew him. That was not this project. This project was, we can bring him back to relative viability because he's kind of bad everywhere. We're going to get rid of the degenerate gameplay pattern here and have some buffs that should make the champion feel good. We'll revisit at a later point in time with a different scope. So here's the math on Gragas E. So here is the base cooldown with no haste whatsoever. Just you have a Doran's Ring or a Doran's Shield or whatever. And if you land E on the target, what is the cooldown of your E as a result? Don't mind the fact that the numbers are red. This is a buff of 25 to 20% of the cooldown of the spell. That's pretty good for no haste Gragas. Now, of course, plenty of times the champion does buy ability haste. Now, his most common role is in jungle. His most common build in jungle is Night Harvester, Shadow Flame, Zonia's Hourglass, Death Cap with the rune Transcendence, which I've manually added the ability haste here at level 5 and level 8. You can see the dips when those come in. But otherwise, assuming some sort of vague scaling from 0 haste at level 1, you don't buy anything until later on. Let's assume you got something like this going on, and hey, you stack ability haste. Now, to be clear, I ignored cooldown boots here. It is likely he buys them. Of course, he can also buy cooldown shoes, whatever. Magic pen shoes. Regardless, eventually, if you get to a 4-item build, and by the way, his most common 5th item is Void Staff. So this is actually, I guess, aside from 5 more ability haste from the Night Harvester Mythic passive, again, until you actually get to a completely full 4 and then 5-item build, this is just a buff, even with the Transcendence rune that Gragas runs. This is just a buff to Gragas E. at functionally all points in time. This change list is clearly win rate positive. He is becoming stronger. Now, top lane Gragas has lower ability haste needs. He might decide to buy fewer ability haste items as a result of this change. Okay, great. We may see a build update that gives some even more win rate in top lane. I didn't investigate that very hard. It wasn't that big of a deal. Regardless, here are the changes to Gragas. His R is a little bit more reliable as well. From testing locally, anything faster than this starts to feel comically too fast. We would have to, if you want to make this explosive cask land more quickly, we'd have to lower the max range of the spell, or like lower the cast time or something. I mean, there's things we could do where it's like we could make the R spawn instantly, but then still lock him into a cast animation. Like, there's some really higher scope stuff we could do to make this like travel instead of a, you know, I think quarter second cast time plus 0.5 second travel. It could be like a 0.65 second travel, but it comes out instantly. But really, that's faster because right now it's 0.75. Like, there's higher scope stuff we could do, but I don't think it's super mandatory right now. Ultimately, Gragas R is somewhat unreliable. By the time you press R, when it lands, is pretty far apart. You're not expected to get perfect accuracy with this, and that's kind of not the point. I think that's fine, but it's just kind of worth pointing out that heroes and, you know, identified thing about this spell. I think that's okay. Next up, we are nerfing Graves. This is, you know, relatively light. It's just 2 armor per cycle quick draw, though keep in mind this does go up to 8 stacks. You keep stacks while jungling, right? If you auto attack any jungle monster, you refresh the stack duration, so it isn't that hard for Graves to have his stacks running at maybe all times, especially if you are really, really good at the game. You can keep 8 stacks for like your entire jungle clear. So not only are you using the buffed armor ratio on the pet, but you are also full armor when Kha'Zix comes to fight you or whatever. This is part of what lightly elite skews Gragas, is there's just a lot of like optimal gameplay around keeping your E stacks, which is like very meaningful for a lot of different reasons. Regardless, it is a relatively small nerf on paper, though it definitely means something. So here's a data table on how much actual armor Graves has at 1 stack of the E versus max stacks of the E. You can see, and this percentage, by the way, is overall actual physical durability, not just A versus B. You can see that 55 or 71 is not, in fact, 90% as much, but it means his physical like damage thing is this. This breakpoint here, it actually can't be this. No, I think it's just linear. I don't know. I'm pretty sure somewhere here I included steel caps in the build. I forget exactly where. I don't believe it was this. I think this is ranking E to rank 2. But I believe I included steel caps somewhere in this. Regardless, it's around here. This is, you know, the functional actual difference. If he's low stacks, he has 1% less physical damage durability. He's usually not at exactly 1 stack. He's also not usually at 8 stacks, which is like 7% less physical durability. Regardless, a nerf for the champion. To make it a bit squishier. This seems fine. This seems reasonable. Okay, great. And again, he still has very, very high armor overall as a champion. That's actually kind of Graves as a champion. It's a small nerf. We'll see what happens. This really, really has no impact at all. We might nerf him again. We'll see what happens. Next big thing, though, this is the other sort of big thing of the patch. The other big thing is actually farther down to the patch notes, but there is a large-scale kit update to Janna. This is basically bringing together what seem to be the best parts of the 2017 and 2019 kit updates of the champions, looking at long-term play rate compared to win rate. Those seem to be the versions of the kit that had the biggest player base relative to her power level. Comparing patch 7.19 Janna to patch 7.13 Janna, is like 2% lower win rate, and yet like similarly very high levels of affection for playing Janna. She was one of the most popular champs in the game after that update. Now, to be fair, part of why Janna was popular in patch 7.19 was this was around the time of Worlds, and people were like, oh my gosh, all I want to play is Enchanter's Ardent Censer. This is all we're ever going to pick. But after that all settled down and Ardent Censer got nerfed in 2018, she was still a popular support. So it wasn't just like, for these 3 weeks she was popular. It's like this happened after the Ardent Censer nerf, so we moved off of the Ardent Censer meta. Though certainly people were really slow to realize how good that was. Regardless, let's talk about Janna and what's going on here. So first, there is a bit of just like, while I'm here, I want to do some cleanup. I want to do some consistency. I want to do a small amount of normalization. let's talk about line by line. So first of all, this is one of the elements from the previous element, which is she has 550, which is like normal, good attack range. Obviously, there are champs with more. This is Tristana passive. This is Varus, Annie, Caitlyn, Ashe. Like, there are champs who have very good attack range. This is just like, you have good marksman attack range. This is like the default. You're a pretty good auto attacker. We expect you to be a pretty good auto attacker. You're 550. Okay, great. Good for you. The mana changes are primarily consistency, though it does have direct value for this champion, which is to say that I like condensing mana pools more toward the norm. I'm a fan of mana pools looking and feeling the same, and so if I can nudge mana pools sort of towards the center, I like to do that whenever I do changes like this, where they get lost in the shuffle anyway, but as long as I'm confident the changes are doing the right thing, I will do them. If I'm not confident in the right thing, I will not go and do this change. But in the case of Janna, it's like, okay, you're going to have a bit lower mana growth. That's fine. I've lowered your mana costs to make sure that your rank up incentives are good and are in line with what's going on. You have a little bit higher mana at level 1. That's not a very big deal, but even though she has less mana growth, she has less aggressive mana cost scaling on her rank ups. Again, this is not really needed. I could have done no mana changes here, it would have been fine, but I just like to nudge the game towards what I think mana pools should be, which is more similar, like how energy is similar across a lot of champions. Really minor thing, doesn't really matter. This doesn't really have explicit goals other than, again, consistency. I am not a fan of squishy champions having aggressively large amounts of armor. I know in the previous patch, I buffed Seraphine's armor quite a bunch. I lowered her health growth. I gave her a bunch more flat armor at level 1. That had the unfortunate side effect of probably being bot lane skew, which is probably wasn't worth doing. I probably shouldn't have done it. In the case of Janna, she's not suddenly going to go into a different role, so it's not going to be that big of a problem. But one thing that has happened slowly but surely is we have crept armor a lot in League of Legends, and it's made lethality a pretty bad stat. So, right now we can't go and delete, 5 to 30 armor off every champion in League of Legends. But that's probably what would be required to or something kind of like that without just like buffing lethality items by a ton, which is also a possibility, of course. But basically just like lethality, the stat just has not kept up with how much armor champions have gotten. And so seeing a champion that is potentially just supposed to be squishy have 5 armor growth, like, this is too high. You're not meant to be good against Talon. You're meant to have to ult the Talon away or use your Q. Let's bring you back towards a little bit more normalcy so you're not just so skewed anti-AD. I don't think Janna reads as an anti-AD champion. A stat like armor is invisible largely. Like, yeah, it's on the you can click on the champion, it's on the portrait, whatever, but like the kind of thing where I don't like seeing that, and so I just traded out some armor growth with health growth. That's really all that was there. And then, hey, attack damage is getting traded out because she's getting a bonus attack damage via her new passive. And then, hey, cleaning up her attack wind up to be relatively fast so that she can feel like she's pretty good auto attacks, right? Bonus attack range. This is a numbers trade. Let's talk about it. Okay, so let's talk about the fact that passive is changing. So the old version, the 2017 version of Janna, actually always got this bonus move speed. I have removed the always get the bonus move speed. Instead, she no longer gets move speed at all herself, but champions who face her still get 6% bonus move speed. They get move speed when they face her. She turns bonus move speed into bonus damage on hit and on spell, on W specifically, on W specifically. Now, there could be a like higher scope version of Janna where she gives the W pet over to her teammate, and when she presses E on them, they get the move speed and the bonus on hit damage via her passive and whatever. Like, there's totally a high scope version here where she gives them the bird. That's not this set of changes. This was not meant to be extra exploration. I'm also aware that Wild Rift just did a Janna kit update. It looks really cool, but it happened like 3 weeks ago, so there's not a lot of like, was this good long term? Did people stick with this? We can't tell without waiting a few months, but we do know the 2017 and 2019 versions of Janna had a player base, and so is going for this here. But we'll talk about the numbers here and move over. So here is Janna's base AD, and assuming you are maxing W first, which gives move speed, and assuming you buy boots 1 at level 6 and boots 2 at level 10, here is the functional auto attack damage of Janna before and after. You'll notice that her base AD is like off by 1 or 2 after accounting for learning W at level 1, so pretty similar here. And then as soon as you get boots 1 and some ranks in the ability, obviously your auto attack damage is much nicer, and you get rank 2 of boots, and it's even nicer. And as you get levels on your champion, the conversion of move speed into damage gets better and better. And this is actually not accounted for in this calculation. As you get ability power, the move speed passive of W increases as well, which will actually further push into the green. So I'm not counting AP here. This is actually even nicer than it looks like on paper. So clearly, Janna is a much better auto attacker than before. Okay, great. She has more attack range, even though she has less base AD. Clearly, her actual auto attack damage is better than before. Plus the fact that champions tend to have less magic resist than armor, so any given case where you're attacking somebody, the bonus damage that is coming from magic damage itself, because keep in mind, only 90 of this is coming from AD, the other 28.7, and this is not counting for ability power ratios, is coming from magic damage, and that's going to be mitigated less. Now, of course, level 18 Janna doesn't really exist in any game, but, you know, we can stop around here, and it's still better, right? This champion's still stronger, even when the auto attack damage is less. She has, you know, bonus attack range, she'll be fine. This is the math on just the baseline mana pool. Her mana regen has not changed. This is just her mana pool itself. Not much to talk about here. She has a little bit of mana, but it'll be fine. This just means that, hey, your ability to spam is a little bit worse. Whatever. Doesn't mean a ton. Just, hey, your overall mana pool is a little bit more constrained. And what this does, by the way, right, if I constrain your mana pool, right, if your mana pool is constrained, it means that I, as a designer, have more control over what runs you out of mana. Because your mana pool is constrained, then I say, oh, well, W is cheaper, E is cheaper, Q is more expensive, then, like, I can account for you pressing W and E more often, and this will just, like, counterbalance the mana pool loss. But if your Q is more expensive and your mana pool is down, you really can't spam Q as much. So this doesn't have to happen, of course. This could have been accomplished with just mana cost changes. But again, I do like having champions have a somewhat constrained mana pool. It's not a huge deal, but it's the kind of thing that I like doing and just nudging in the right direction so that the systems can take care of themselves in a better situation. Okay, next thing, as we mentioned, health and armor growth changed. This is not accounting for stat shards like armor and whatnot, but hey, here's how much health Janna has as a champion. Nice, cool, clean numbers. Nothing much to say here. The reason isn't clean numbers, it's just this brings her more toward the average of enchanters. I'm a fan of champs who don't need to be exceptional, not having exceptions in their health bars. Just sort of my opinion. Here is her total armor as a champion, but multiplying her armor against her health, we can see that her total physical durability is still larger, and of course her magic damage durability is larger as well. This makes her more powerful in worlds where she is not shielding herself. Of course, if she is shielding herself, plus health is less valuable, and minus armor hurts a bit more. But again, I didn't like how armor skewed she was, and so I slightly unarmor skewed her just because I thought that was worth doing. So, of course, this is power positive. This is power positive. This, to be fair, is a nerf, but there's a lot of buffs here in this changes, and so I'm trying to buy room for those buffs with some various nerfs. Mana cost increase in Howling Gale, cooldown increase in Howling Gale, and early game Tornado Poke is worse. There are 3 different levers, all of which are nerfing early game max charge Tornado Poke. The first thing I tried here was actually a nerf to missile speed and missile distance to Q, going back to the 2017 or 2019 version, basically just undoing the stuff from last year. And playtest feedback was immediate in that it felt too slow. Even though it had been this way for a long time and it got buffed in 2019, people were like, it's faster. It got buffed last year, people can't unsee it. And so I cannot undo missile speed, so I'm nerfing it in like literally every other way I can that doesn't have direct feels hits. Like the knockup duration is still there. Congratulations. Let's talk about the nerfs though to the Q. So here is the mana cost on Janna Q. I am personally a fan of having lighter mana cost rank ups. I often find it... I think having aggressive mana cost rank ups is a good way to disincentivize maxing a skill. Sure. But I find oftentimes there are aggressive mana cost rank ups on abilities that I don't think need to be disincentivized. Now, in this case, I don't think there needs to be a disincentive here because the other rank ups are already better and you shouldn't need this anyway. But if it's like, actually, there's weirdly a Q-Max Janna build and we really want to hate on it, we can nerf the mana cost and say, no, the mana cost actually goes up with the rank. We're going to disincentivize that. Again, I don't think it's going to happen, but that is a lever there. Otherwise, again, I would rather have a like slightly more constrained mana pool where it looks more like other mana pools. And, you know, instead of having like a bunch of mana growth to keep up with your spell cost going up, I would rather have your stuff be more contained. That's just sort of my light opinions on mana. There's a bigger topic here that we talked about, but I think from my sort of initial kind of mental explorations, I think it's probably a good thing. Regardless, the mana cost is up, which means, hey, your desire to spam Q in lane is 50% more expensive with a 12% longer cooldown or whatever. Close enough. Now, again, the damage change, let's talk about the math here. So the ability power did go up by 15% here on Q. So if you snapcast Q, you have 5 less base damage, but with a 15% greater AP ratio, this costs, what, 6? 30? 30 ability power? Around 30, like 5 ability power will make snapcastings as good, which like is really trivial. Like this is just 1 stat shard and Shard of True Ice. Like you can build only non-AP items like Redemption, and you can go Locket, and you can go Knight's Vow, and you'll still have a better snapcast Q. The big change, though, is that the charge up on Q is down by 15 damage. That's going to be felt for a very, very long time. So even with expected ability power, she tends to buy Ardent Sensor and Moonstone and just ends up getting about 120 ability power in a full build, accounting for stat shards and basic runes and everything else. This is still just going to be nerfed until you get more ranks in the ability, because you just don't get enough AP to compensate for the extra 15 damage down here. This is still enough with the knockup duration to make charging it worth it. If you can, you will, but saying, hey, yeah, we're just not going to give you this. This is one of the places we're going to reduce power from this champion. Next set of changes are to her W. So this cooldown change came actually last minute. This was not on PBE initially. We put this in really late into the patch. The magnitude read we got back from the gameplay analysis team was that we thought, or at least they thought, the win rate magnitude here was going to be too high. Personally, I will say that I'm comfortable if Janna gains about 1% win rate and goes from about 52 to 53. That is fine. I am comfortable with version 1 of this Janna being 53% win rate and seeing how it pans out. If this has to be nerfed, it will, but I am comfortable with this launching at 53% observed win rate. That is the win rate I am willing to accept. I think she'll be more fun kind of regardless, as long as she's not trash. But anyway, the feedback came back that they thought this would be more than a 1% win rate buff, and so we tacked on a nerf really late in the patch. Moving this cooldown, it was 8 to 6, it's 7 to 9. This is, of course, still a meaningful cooldown buff. As mentioned, the mana cost nerf, less aggressive. The damage is getting changed around, but of course we're getting Tailwind bonus damage. Because the cooldown's getting cut so severely, we're cutting the slow duration down. And then the big change, though, is that Zephyr no longer turns off while on cooldown. I think this is actually really, really valuable, because there's an anti-synergy with Janna's gameplay pattern, which is if I auto after my W, I lose bonus move speed because my W turns off and my bonus move speed goes down, and so I don't get this stuff anymore. And I thought that was really, really, really silly. And I was like, that's dumb. She can keep her ghosting. She can keep this other stuff. She's going to lose this as recompense. This is a compensation nerf for never losing your W passive. To be fair, this is W passive just always gives more move speed than this, but in terms of like W is up and I'm running towards my mid laner, it's a nerf because you don't get both of these. In a case where I cast W and then what do I do now? It's a buff because W is better than her passive. But basically, I thought the weird optimization of don't really auto attack after casting W was really, really silly. I didn't like it. And so it doesn't happen anymore. You just always keep Zephyr, which means, by the way, that her little bird is always orbiting around her shoulder. It's just always there. It's just like part of her now. That's tied to the W passive, which just no longer goes away. I think that is totally fine. But hey, by the way, that's a change being made here. No longer remove all cooldown, which removes the weird stuff around if you press W, your auto attack damage goes down, which I think is very, very silly. It also means that if you're running away from someone, it is always fine to W them. You're not going to inch yourself by like, well, I slowed them for a second, but now my move speed's gone for 12, and does this even let me get away? Like, we have thankfully moved away pretty aggressively from Kiss Curse abilities. Where it's like, I gained this thing, but I lose something for casting it. We have generally gotten rid of them. That is a good thing. I think we probably shouldn't have them in almost any situations, unless they're like really obviously part of the character, like Briar W, and then she can press E to get away from it. I think Briar W is a really good Kiss Curse kind of ability, where I get a bunch of attack speed, moves, whatever. I also lose control of my character. Intended. Janna doesn't know if she should cast W when running away from someone or not. Silly. In my opinion, silly. So removed. Anyway, there is a mana cost change, there is a damage change, there is a cooldown change. Let's talk about them. So here is the cooldown before and after. It is, of course, meaningfully buffed. You're getting a lot more of the spell. The mana cost is, of course, nicer as well. If we're asking you to max W, let's not have the mana cost nearly double by maxing it. To me, that makes sense. To me, that is logical. The fact that, like, Janna ooms faster at level 9 compared to level 1, just to me is very, very silly. Also, it just makes sense when you're lowering the cooldown's ability. You should probably lower the mana cost, commensurate with that, so that you're not really, really griefing your mana pool super, super, super hard, because holy moly, are you like just ballooning your mana per second here by doing this. I think it's reasonable to have mana cost scale to some degree commensurate with how much more powerful they are getting, though clearly we're not willing to scale your mana costs one-to-one with the power of the ability, which I think is probably correct not to do that, by the way. Otherwise, you actually lose power in some cases by ranking up the spell, which is very, very silly in my opinion. Anyway, cooldown better, mana cost better, great, let's move on. But both these, of course, incentivize maxing the ability. Okay, how about the damage of the W itself? Now, I'm using the passive stuff from way up there, where I'm getting boots 1 at level 6, I'm getting boots 2 at level 10, at 6, 11, and 16, the passive damage conversion spikes, and I'm assuming that you are maxing W first. So in the early game, your W is in fact weaker, though of course the cooldown is shorter, and your mana costs aren't very meaningful, and also your auto attacks are better. So like well, actually your auto attacks are worse technically. There's longer range, but it means that okay, I have more reachable W autos, and I have them more often. Just per shot, they're going to be weaker. That is true. Her level 1, 2, 3 trading is going to deal less per action. That is absolutely true, but her autos just have as much range as her W, so she can do both of them. Again, the low level mana costs are unchanged, so she will herself at a similar cadence, same with her E cost, but hey, that is just a fact of the matter. That said, though, the big change is the DPS, because there is a cooldown buff to go with the damage buff. The potential DPS of the W is substantially higher. This is obviously lower than a marksman would do with this kind of stuff, but hey, if she is playing a 20-second long team fight and remains in range, she's getting a lot more out of casting W repeatedly. So this is just a way of rolling the total damage change and everything else together. We are, in this case, including the AP ratio in the base damage. We are not including the AP ratio in the move speed calculation. I realize that's kind of disingenuous. It's actually a little bit more green than this because of AP, because AP gives bonus move speed and would further incentivize this stuff, but regardless, I thought it was relatively negligible, and so I didn't bother to include it, though it is worth noting that is a true thing here. The final set of changes are to Eye of the Storm. R has no direct changes here. So Eye of the Storm, what I noticed from the 2019 rework was when W was made to reduce the, or rather, when any active spell, when Q, W, or R applies crowd control once per spell, you will get 20% off of the E cooldown. And I guess to be fair, this is a typo. This is not remaining cooldown. This is of the overall cooldown of the spell. So if it's half done and you press QWR, you will get the entire spell back. This is a typo. This is my fault. I wrote this. It is 20% of the spell's cooldown. My bad. Regardless, this was a change that basically by itself spiked her interest and enjoyment and play rate, and Janna players were excited to play this version of Janna, which was a lower W cooldown and an incentive to use this to refresh your E shield, so that if you want to shield people more often, you have to get in there and cast. And to be fair, W has a 650 target range. That is not auto attack range. It's center of her model to center of the target's model. It is basically the same as 550 auto attack range. Basically, if you're in auto attack range, you can W, and you can refund your E cooldown. So the base cooldown is getting worse because there is a cooldown refund. The base shield is getting stronger because you're no longer getting healed and shield power. The mana cost is getting nicer because, again, I don't want to disincentivize you maxing this ability. To be fair, I did the same thing with Q, but I also just really wanted Q to be more expensive as a spell, so whatever. But I kept the rank 1 value low and then made the incentive less bad, which I thought was correct. And again, made the shield stronger by a pretty good amount, right? 5 to, 45 or so. Bonus shielding, pretty good, right? Ratio unchanged. I don't think she needs it. We'll see, though. The bigger, weirder, spicier change, maybe, is that the shield no longer decays. So a phrase I'm going to repeat that I am a fan of is exceptions for exceptional cases. I am a fan of standardization. I think it is useful from a learnability standpoint. The fewer esoteric rules there are, the better, because then it means if you've seen one ability, it's likely to be similar to another ability, and it's more learnable. This can be in subtle ways like last hitting on a mage. It can be in subtle ways like being feels similar on other champions. This can be things like, how long you can play in combat before you run out of mana. there's just a bunch of stuff that kind of is like this. Like a lot of spells have the exact same cast like animation timing, which makes spell casts feel pretty similar unless they need to be different. I think these are useful and it just kind of helps the transferable skills of League of Legends. I think it's just useful because there are some champions like say Singed or Shaco or Udyr, where even though those aren't like mechanically complex champions, their play style is so different that they have very, very steep mastery curves. And that is fine when it's like, here's Singed. He's not like other champions. I love Singed, by the way. He is one of my absolute favorite champions. And those people like kind of like clown on him. I love Singed. This champion is amazing. But he plays so much unlike other champions. But like that's kind of a call out. Like that's Singed. He's definitely different. Whereas like, oh, this champion, they just function differently in like weird subtle ways that aren't obvious because why would it be obvious? And that's the kind of thing where it's like, that's probably just rough edges that can be smoothed out over time if it's not an intentional thing. So exceptions for exceptional cases, but otherwise standardization I think is helpful as a learning tool. This is to say that back in, I think it was 2018, Riot tried to standardize shields to be shorter duration, to say, hey, we want enchanters to be higher skill cap. We want there to be a timing test, a reaction test, or at least a like solid prediction test on shielding someone right before combat. A lot of our shields were like early Janna shield, like back in 2009 was 14 seconds long. 14 seconds long. Now, that's probably way too long for a shield because it really just means cast it on cooldown. Don't think about it at all. It's probably way too low of mind share. Anyway, fast forward to 2018 and shields got made to be 2.5 seconds. That became the standard shield duration. Like that is reasonable and it seems to work for Lulu and Milio and Karma and a lot of these champions. The weird thing with Janna was because Janna has a buff attached to it that gives her target bonus attack damage while the shield holds, it needed special rules. It needed to be an exception. It was an exceptional case. For example, with Lulu E, you get the shield for 2.5, but Pix hangs out for 7 seconds and fires bolts out. Like it's reasonable to do that. I think it's totally fine. But Pix has a literal affordance in the game, right? You can see it. It's got a visual representation, and you're aware that Pix is out here shooting up bullets. Great, totally fine, totally makes sense. The shield decays, Pix is still here, totally reasonable. Because Janna's bonus AD is tied to the shield, and it should because you want the buff to have some kind of visual representation, this is an exception. The buff is tied to the shield, but also the buff can't only be 2.5 seconds long because you actually do want to cast this proactively some. So to me, Janna shield is an exceptional case where the duration should be longer than other shields. Janna is special. Here's an exception for an exceptional case because her buff has to be tied to the shield. And by being this kind of buff, it needs to be castable proactively, not reactively, not in response to damage, but because Lucian wants to start an all-in and I want to give him a buff. And like Nami E gives you like 5 seconds and Lulu E gives you 7 seconds. And to me, this is reasonable and an appropriate shield duration. Anyway, when those changes happen to all the other enchanters, having the shield decay absolutely crushed Janna's play rate. This was the only change to Janna, and it fell like a comet and didn't recover for a long time. And so saying, yep, I have made the call as a designer. Janna E is an exception. She's getting an exception. Anyway, let's run the math here. So Janna's baseline cooldown and shield strength are here on this table. Don't mind the green. This is a cooldown increase, which is a nerf. Of course, the base shield accounting for how much ability power we expect her to buy is here. And here's how much the shield is stronger as well. You'll notice that the cooldown looks a little bit larger than the shield strength, which is probably true. Then we say, okay, what if we tag 1 CC before and after, right? Right, here's the old cooldown. It doesn't change by rank at all, of course. In fact, we can put the decimals out there. There we go. Here is the new cooldown with the incentives attached here, right? With us lowering the cooldown a little bit by landing 1 spell. And you can see my cooldown is shorter until we get max rank of the shield. For normalization, by the way, I'm choosing to assume that old Janna shield is being maxed second now. It's obviously a little bit fraudulent. She used to max it first, but it's just so that you can compare rank to rank, and that's all. you see, okay, actually, yeah, cool. The cooldown is much nicer now relative to other rank 1 through 4 versions of the spell if I land 1 CC during this. And what about the overall power of the shield? Well, it's a bit worse, but the cooldown's much, much nicer. And then, you know, later on, actually, even though you got heal and shield power in the old version of Janna, well, actually, if I'm only getting, you know, 1 bump per shield cast, my shield is actually better from later ranks, even with ability power. And it's also worth noting that I'm actually overrepresenting this version of the champion, because if you have something like Moonstone Renewer and Redemption and Ardent Sensor, all of items that have heal and shield power on them, the relative value of more heal and shield power is lower because it scales additively. So I'm actually overcounting the percentage gain from this passive right here. And so it's actually nicer than it looks. So lower cooldown for a larger portion of the game relative to other low ranks, and a actually better shield in a large portion of this. This is overall to say that this is not a very strict buff to the E-Shield. I think this change is absolutely a real buff and is really powerful. But this is not strictly more powerful as an ability, except to say that your W cooldown is much shorter than before. Certainly your Q cooldown is longer, so it's not all the same. But you are going to get probably more shields because you're getting more W casts. It's also worth noting, though, that because you're losing this heal and shield power gain, this is not multiplying redemption. It's also not multiplying your ultimate. So there are some pretty meaningful hits to power here. It is possible that Janna loses win rate with this patch. We are happy to buff her if that is the case. I have seen all the sentiment online being that we are buffing Janna. She's going to look good. And again, that entirely might be true. I am comfortable with up to 1% win rate gain. If we get more than that, we will bring her down. It is also possible, because the Q is just a worse spell, because she is not getting better move speed while roaming, because she is a little bit more assassinatable when she is shielded herself, because she does have less mana pool late game, because she potentially has worse shielding, because she does have lower ulti power. This could still be a nerf to Janna. We will happily buffer if that's the case, of course. I'm going to spend some time talking about K'Sante. It's worth noting that when we locked this patch, which was a full week ago, we had micropatch K'Sante here, and data was indicating that in elite matchmaking grading brackets, K'Sante was between 50.5 and 51% win rate, which is more than reasonable and puts him like pretty average for a Masters Plus top laner. Right? Nothing too fancy here. The clips of like Yankos going, what is his champion, was pre-micro patch, and it's like, yeah, okay, this champion is like 51. That's fine if he stays 51, and it stayed for like 2 days. He was like just chilling at 50.5 to 51 for like 3 days, and we look at him on Monday and Tuesday, and it's like, yeah, okay, cool. This micro patch was meaningful. It was like a 3% win rate drop. All right, we nerfed the champion meaningfully. 51 in Masters is totally fine. That's totally fine for a champion. Like right now, Quinn wins more games in Masters Plus relative than K'Sante did a week ago when he locked this patch down. And I don't think anyone thinks Quinn is broken OP or anything. We locked the patch, and over the weekend, his win rate grew. And it grew a lot, actually. He's it's tough because there's only so many games Masters Plus, and so if you don't want to be like washed out in variants, you have to like be selective about like how many days you want to choose. But cleanly post micro patch, and then also just like erasing another like 3 days post micro patch as well. Looking at like just like the last 7 days, K'Sante's more like a 52.5% win rate Masters Plus top laner. That's scary. That makes him the first or second best top laner Masters Plus. We expect him to be elite skewed. We expect that to still be the case for this champion, because he is a high skill cap. This is just the case. We expect him to be elite skewed because he requires a lot of mastery, and he requires a lot of mechanical skill to play him well. So he's going to be elite skewed. That's going to be true. That's fine. We were happy with K'Sante 50.5 to 51. K'Sante 52.5, pretty scary. We intend to nerf K'Sante in 13.23. In fact, next time PvE updates, there will be nerfs for K'Sante on that patch, and you can see them for yourself, and you can give feedback on if you think those are enough. But considering that the old K'Sante, who was pro skewed and basically stuck in pro jail, was only a 50% win rate champion in Challenger, we would like to get K'Sante to a 50% win rate in Masters, so that we can like get him a little bit more appreciable. And instead of being like a 44% win rate champion in low elo, he can be like a 6% win rate champion in low elo, right? So like, it's not griefing that you're playing this champion. Like, it's gonna require mastery. Like, you gotta get good, but like, let's make it not griefing to pick this champion. Let's, have room for counterplay. But again, as players have gotten better with him, it has very clearly indicated that he is too performant in high-level solo queue play, so we will be almost certainly nerfing him in 2 weeks' time. This is just to give you updated thoughts on this champion as we react to players and how they adapt to him. And if his win rate, by the way, gains a bunch more, right? Like before we lock the patch in 7 days, if it's like, oh, he's 54 in Elite now, we will do bigger nerfs, right? We will, again, target him to be like 50 to 50.5 in Masters Plus. Okay. Kassadin is getting nerfed. He was one of the big winners of the durability update, not the durability update, sorry, the anti-snowballing changes that made games go a bit longer, that made, just games less snowbally, right? So that if you had a weak early game, you were less likely to be blown out just because of the bad early game. Overall, Kassadin was one of the big winners here, and considering how much agency this champion has over snowballing and just force killing enemy champions, this is the kind of champion that really is not allowed to sit substantially above 50% win rate. One thing we have noticed is that Kassadin's AP ratios are incredibly high relative to any other mage-like champion. And so we are going after the gold scaling of this champion because he snowballs harder than we are comfortable with. And so we're targeting both a bit of 1-stack Rift Walk as well as Force Pulse. Both these ratios are still incredibly strong, but going down some. So here is the math. On our example Kassadin build, this is going to, 4-ish items. Often he buys Death Cap, sometimes he doesn't, so you have to kind of split the difference here. But hey, 36 AP is double stat shard plus Doran's Ring. 536 is just 536 bonus AP from items afterwards, which is about 4.5, 5 items based on Death Cap. And E damage is down by about 2 to 3%. R damage, this is accounting for his max mana, but it's not accounting for stacks. Keep in mind he can, I think it's either double or triple the damage of R based on stacks. So if he is fully stacked here, the damage numbers are less severe here, but 0 stack R damage. It is a damage nerf. This is going to be some amount of win rate for sure. It's a nerf, right? Not much to say here. We're targeting about 1.5% win rate. We think we're going to get around there with this, but what else to say? It's a Kassadin nerf. Here are the numbers. Nilah is also doing very, very well. She is a late game scaling bot laner. She's late game scaling relative to other bot laners, so we are targeting largely her late game. She is normal skewed, which doesn't have to be a problem. It just is the case. But ultimately saying, okay, well, I don't think your special niche is that you are a late game hyper carry. There's no need for you to be there. I don't mind flattening that out because, I just don't think there's a need to do that. Any late game nerf will tend to very lightly undo some normal skew. I think it is reasonable if Nilah is right as meant to be a relatively mechanically complex, like pretty flashy champion. I think it's better if she has a closer win rate by like MMR skew. To me, that is logical for a champion like this. Of course, she has a relatively weak landing phase, and that's going to be kind of hard to beat no matter what. And of course, elite players are really going to be using bad landing phases. Regardless, though, all this to say that we are nerfing her, and so I chose targets that I thought were going to make sense based on sort of those tactical goals here. So level scaling on her bonus attack speed goes down. She's going to be a little bit more incentivized to get attack speed somewhere else in her build. And a bonus AD ratio nerf on the DPS part of Apotheosis. Also, you can pronounce it as Apotheosis if you want. Your choice. Overall, though, a small gold scaling nerf to the R. I talked about this earlier with Briar. I'm a fan of ultimates being high base value and not reliant on gold scaling to be powerful unless they really have to be. Things like Crowstorm, where you really don't want Tank Fiddlesticks to be a thing, whereas Nilah, I think, is nowhere near to be that ended up being a problem. Either way, here is expected Nilah's attacks per second during Q. This is assuming that you slowly acquire Berserker degrees over the course of the game. This is accounting for her base stats as well. This is basically her actual live build. And yeah, it's auto attack damage down by a solid amount in the mid to late game. She's going to be a worse auto attack carry if you don't find other sources of attack speed. It's going to be softened if you do. And then here is the total damage of R, accounting for her expected 4-item build. Collector, Quick Blades, etc. Roughly, here is what we expect the 4-item, 1 to 4-item build damage of the R, assuming you hit all of it. And of course, it's still a plenty high damage spell. Still heals people, does all kind of cool stuff, but power down indeed. Rammus got hit too hard with changes in the previous patch. He got gains from systemic buffs to systemic nerfs to AD junglers, as well as buffs to the armor ratio on pets. We then sent him a nerf in 0.21. That nerf sent him overboard because we also undid some of the nerfs to AD junglers, and now he is too weak for what he should be, and so we're just kind of undoing it, trying to make sure any champion like Rammus, so any champion that is really, really low elo skewed, like Rammus or Amumu, I think that is fine. I think it is good that these champions are always strong for beginner junglers and sort of more rookie players. I also want to really, really ensure these champions feel safe in their own jungle. The last time I buffed Amumu, I buffed his early clear speed. Because I think most importantly, like some of the like strategic purpose of these champions, like on the game League of Legends level, is I do not know how to jungle. My friend, we're playing, I don't know, quick play together or something, and I am put in the jungle. Who should I play? And my friend goes, "Oh, you should play Mumu or Rammus. They're really easy," right? Like, especially if it's like, "Oh, my friends are diamond and I'm silver" or whatever. It's like it's not Master Yi. Like, if you want to go, like, hardcore and, like, go try to carry your games in silver with other silver players, okay, Master Yi is a champ for you. Go for it, right? Go have fun. But it's like, oh, I'm playing with my friends who are higher skill. What do I do? Here are some easy-to-play champions that you are going to be successful on, where you can play with your friends and not get just completely eviscerated by the one camp invade Kindred. I mean, you probably still are if it's a challenger Kindred invading you. You're still going to lose. But, like, you can clear safely and you're under low threat. I think that is really, really valuable for champions like this. And so anytime I buff Rammus, I actually try to make his early game nicer. Same thing for champions like Amumu. It's interesting that these kinds of changes do also push toward elite skew. Now, again, they're like here going to here. It's not close in terms of normal versus elite, but that's not bad if they are slightly viable in higher MMRs. But this happened with Master Yi a while back, where we added a ton of skill suppression to Master Yi to like flatten out his win rate by MMR, and it made him like maybe it was better for Master Yi to be easy, and it means he's like a 52% low elo champion instead of 50% low elo champion. But it's been correct for him to just like, yeah, he's in low elo, he's just good in silver, and you learn to beat him by learning to be coordinated. Like you beat this champion by learning the strategic counterplay to Master Yi, and he's not meant to have all the tools to outplay all your skill shots. Sorry if you're a challenger Yi main, maybe this is not like there's a reasonable discussion there to be like, yeah, this is actually like the right place for that champion to be. Anyway, let's make sure Rammus is early clear, feels very safe, very secure, and it is easy to do. I think that is valuable to have this for Rammus. He also happens to be a really strong anti-armor pick, or anti-AD pick. Okay, great. Anyway, let's do the math. So here is Rammus before and after. This is using the double armor stat shard and no items whatsoever. Here is how much armor he has during his W, assuming you max it. I think I did max it second, actually. Yeah, I assumed you max it second. I don't know why I did this. It doesn't really matter, to be clear, but like this is being max at second. It doesn't really change anything, right? Like, can you tell that it spiked at 8, 10, 12, 13? Not really. Okay, who cares? But anyway, this is live patch versus patch coming out. This is comparing to the old Rammus from 13.20 compared to now. Again, it's fine. Again, here's the old numbers, whatever. Yeah, it's actually your early game clears are very, very similar to before. Your gold scaling is a little bit worse. Keep in mind there was still an early Powerball nerf that is through from the previous patch. And the one thing to really point out, though, is we are not talking about items here. And it's worth noting that one of the changes in the previous patch was an armor ratio nerf. So when you get Bramble Vest, when you get Thornmail, when you get Sunfire Cape, right, you are getting 5% less armor from those armor items. Every 20 armor is 1 less armor. You can see how different these are. In some cases, they're off by 1 or 2 armor. Every 20 armor is 1 less armor. This is not really a buff in the mid game. This is only the stat shard version. So his gold scaling is lower, to be clear. This is not accounted for here. But like if we just add, let's just add, 100 armor right here, right? And in the calculations, you can see, right, it becomes a nerf, right? Anyway, moving on. Senna, another big performer. When snowballing gets weaker, Senna gets to go later into the game. Her occasionally weak early game, she is very frail in the early game, is less punishable, or when punished, it translates into victory less often. She becomes much, much better. Senna is a huge winner from the anti-snowballing changes, and so she needs to be a little bit weaker. We are not nerfing her gold scaling in the way that we did with someone like maybe Kassadin and we had done with Rammus. We are nerfing her early mid-game base values. That no, you are going to be reliant on gold income. You are going to be reliant on soul drops. You're going to have less reliable baseline value. Statistically, Q damage and overall healing are performed more in elite level play than low level play. In a world where we can kind of pick any level we want on Senna and any of them can make sense, I chose this one as a way to very lightly alleviate some of her win rate by MMR skew. I think that is valuable to achieve when it's reasonable to do so, and it's not like clearly on theme. Like nothing about Senna says, yes, it requires a mastermind player to be able. It's like, nah, she's just a really fun marksman support who's really fun to play. So it is baseline value down on Q, and it is baseline heal value down on the Q as well. So it is nerfs to Q, but of course Q is still going to be your best first max. No problem at all. Of course, I'm expecting you to still use the bonus AD ratio, no problem. But hey, the base value is lower. I'm just going to make sure I did the math right. 170 base becomes 150 base. Indeed, that's the numbers. Yes, okay, great. So what does it actually mean for Senna? Well, it means she's doing less damage out of the Q. It means she's going to rely more on her auto attacks, maybe some W, maybe some R, maybe the follow-up, to get the second stack, to get the soul, to get the current health damage, all that stuff, but going to rely a bit more on that to do her job. Of course, rank 1 is unchanged, unsurprisingly, so the very early laning phase, of course, not different at all. And then for the healing difference here, is actually doing a very long interpolation, 0 to 25 lethality. In the real world, she's getting, Eclipse around here, or Armable Glaive around here, and then Eclipse is done like around here. And then her, she's getting all 25 lethality already, instead of this being like, it's like, hey, let's give her 25 lethality now, right? And we can kind of update that slightly and say, hey, the numbers are a little bit less bad than it looks, so we get our second item at level 11. Okay, great. But yeah, it is a nerf, right? It is, up to about 10%-ish, if you're going to average it out off of her Q in terms of damage and healing coming out. And this is even accounting for 300 bonus AD, which is full build and like 140 souls level 18. Around there, something in that kind of ballpark, sure. Keep in mind that, like, she doesn't have AD growth, so it's like, it doesn't really matter if this is level 18 or not. This is just like, there is no level scaling between like 9 and 17 here. Like, none of this matters. This is just, hey, how close to 300 bonus AD did you get? It's somewhere between here and here. This is just item acquisition and soul acquisition from this point to this point. Don't worry about like the level points. Those don't really matter. These actions aren't relevant in any way at all. It's just, hey, you somehow transition from here to full build. Okay, so and this is like 140 souls. Full build is around here. Okay, great. Next set of changes are to Seraphine. So definitely we made some mistakes in the 0.21 patch. She ended up gaining more win rate in bot lane than she did in mid and support. We did open up W max being a viable build on support Seraphine, which is cool. But still has some work to do to get all of her roles into a better spot. Maybe there should have been a larger set of reverts here. Ultimately, it was just like, okay, let's throw in some nerfs because she gained a lot of win rate. Let's try to have those nerfs disproportionately affect bottom lane. And while we're here, can we try some other levers that we think should also be appropriately skewed to her correct roles? So it is a reshape on her passive to be more about base value and level scaling and less about AP ratio. If the numbers are right, this will help mid more than bot lane because mid laner and bot laner gains the same amount of gold, but mid laner gains more XP. So any level-based thing is going to be better for a level scaling role. While bot and support Seraphine gain the same amount of gold per XP as each other, like they both, like support Seraphine gains 80% as much gold and 80% as much experience as bot lane, so this in general is going to be a bit of a wash. She tends to buy lower ability power items. So anything that is base value from AP ratio ends up being support skewed. What's also nice is support Seraphine uses her passive more / better than other roles because she doesn't have to right click to last hit minions. She's much more able to right click on an enemy champion and use her passive well. So any buff to the passive is a very strong support Seraphine buff and a pretty negligible change to mid and bot lane. I mentioned undoing some changes. So this is undoing the cooldown change to high note, which is a buff ranks 1 through 4. Buffing the damage spell, ranks 1 through 4, is clearly bot lane skewed. This was silly. I shouldn't have made this change. And then the surround sound buff here is because the cooldown got dropped pretty meaningfully on surround sound. Of course, where shielding per second went up when the base value went up, but because the AP ratio stayed the same, this meant the AP ratio per second of her shielding went up. Well, AP is gained more by bot lane than support, and when she's in bot lane, she shields more people than in mid lane. An AP ratio per second buff to W is a bot lane buff. And so this is basically saying, well, yeah, when we buff the cooldown, we should nerf the AP ratio. And hey, this buff was incorrect. This is actually a bot lane buff. Let's kind of undo or kind of rectify the choices made here. There's still more that could be done. I don't know how much time we're going to commit to for the Seraphine reshapes. I would like to do it correctly a second time, but for now, this is just a small reactive balance patch where when we can, we'd like to move things around in a way that helps mid and support the most. But also identifying that we have to directly nerf this champion because we sent bot lane Seraphine kind of into the stratosphere. So let's talk about the math here. So here is an expected evolution of Seraphine's passive in bot lane and in support. So as an example, here's the data table of, and this is, what am I looking at here? Hang on. Oh, right, sorry. The AP is down here. So here is how much AP I expect lane Seraphine to have, and here's how much AP I expect support Seraphine to have at any given point in time. Keep in mind that, of course, support Seraphine gains gold much more slowly and earns XP a little bit more slowly, but relative to bot lane, earns them at the same rate, like relative to one another, if that makes sense. Gold per XP is the same in support as it is in bot lane, just they're both slower. Whereas mid lane Seraphine gains the same gold and gains more XP. What that's going to mean is, an example level 6 ability power being this would actually be like an example level 8 ability power for mid lane Seraphine. Just like as an example. I actually did a quick ballpark check. So at exactly 20 minutes, the average support Seraphine is 10, bot Seraphine is 11, and mid Seraphine is 12. As like an example to like just explain this so that you can kind of like understand it in more obvious ways. Okay, so the passive, right? If we are doing this amount of ability power in this ballpark, then we are generally nerfing the passive to Seraphine. Basically, once you are at your first component, you will have more than 50 ability power. Oh, by the way, the break even for the passive is 50, 100, 200, 250 ability power. So 50 AP, you must recall for a component before level 6 for this not to be a strict buff. At 100 AP, you must have a basically completed full first item before level 11. For mid lane, that is basically not going to be achieved. Level 10 to 11 is first item completion time, typically for a solo laner. And of course, is much easily like, more like level 8 or 9 for a bot laner. 200 AP at level 16 is going to be finishing your third item, or at least halfway through your third item. Actually, sorry, this is 250 AP by level 16. Right, let's do that, right? 50, 100, 200 AP by level 11 is trivial. Like, of course you're going to hit that. Of course you're going to hit level 11 before 200 AP. You are going to hit level 11 and get this giant +4 base damage before you finish your second item in any given role. So like this breakpoint here is a strict buff, and it's the level 11 to 15 team fighting scenario, which is like a large portion of the game. And then, at level 16, 250 ability power if you hit level 16 first, which you typically will in mid lane, but typically will not in bot lane. But like we talked about earlier with the Seraphine Q changes, where the ratio went down and the base damage went up, anything that is a buff in tier 3 items is win rate positive for the champion. This is, again, going to be relatively water treading based on role, but is kind of the rough approximations here. So here is sort of where we are. Here's what the math appears to be and roughly is going to be, which is the bot lane one. And then for a support look here, assuming we are buying ability power, pretty linearly throughout the game, we're seeing a lot more green than red for the expected support build. And by the way, to be clear, like this is what bot lane Seraphine builds in slots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is what support Seraphine builds in slots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And keep in mind, if you are hitting this curve at roughly the right kind of same kind of rate, you are going to see green here for support Seraphine. This is how much W is happening in terms of bot lane Seraphine, what she's normally building, and support Seraphine, what she's normally building. Again, you'll notice that the nerf is larger for bot lane farm Seraphine than support Seraphine. Again, the changes are meant to be skewed in that way. And end of the day, if the end result is that Seraphine is now weak and we over-nerfed her, great. It means we can give her buffs that are much more targeted into her specific roles, and we can keep nudging her on the correct path. I feel bad that I got the changes wrong the first time around, and now, of course, we're trying to rectify the mistakes. Okay, not much math to talk about here. We are walking back half of the bonus health ratio on the passive. Keep in mind there was a base damage nerf in the previous patch. There's also a W rank up cooldown incentive in the previous patch, but Tahm Kench gained a lot of power 2 weeks ago, and so we're walking back half the buff, which we think is going to roughly do half what it did before. We think, relatively equally the flat damage change somewhat equalizes the W cooldown change, and we're just going to get, kind of half the win rate gain they got before. Overall, this should still be win rate positive compared to 0.20. Some Tahm Kench changes. The final individual small scope champion change is one to Ziggs. He is crushing it in bot lane right now. Of course, he got some consistency changes that were really good for him. Really positive here, just saying, hey, you know what, base armor going down so that he is more all-inable by a Leona all-in and the AD carry following up or anything like this. Base armor will tend to be a change that disproportionately affects bot lane. Okay, great. Just trying to get bot lane Ziggs into a good spot. And I will, once again, defend that the radius changes in the previous patch were good changes. We elected to just send them and see what the win rate magnitude was going to be in various roles. That change was a mid lane skewed buff, which is good. This allows Ziggs to be closer in mid lane to bot lane on power level, but of course it was power positive. We measured that and said, okay, we should walk back some of his power. And so we're walking back some of his power in a way that can hopefully put mid and bot Ziggs at a relatively similar power level. Makes sense, right? Okay, great. Let's do the math real quick. This is doing it for bot lane Ziggs. He almost always runs the armor stat shard. Here's his physical durability before and after as a result of these changes. He's more killable. Not much to say here. So the next set is a bunch of changes to Mage and Mage-like champions' attack speed. There are 3 types of changes. We can make your basic attack wind up faster, we can bring up the missile speeds, or we can give you some free level 1 attack speed. The overall goals here were to approach a bunch of targets who just simply had bad attack frames, bad missile speeds, or bad attack speed ratios, who didn't need them. Like, there's no reason to have a below average attack speed unless there is a reason to do that, right? Again, exceptions for exceptional cases. Senna and Caitlyn and champions like that should have below average attack speed ratios. They are meant to have slow firing weapons, and so they have slow firing weapons. Otherwise, get yourself up to 0.625, go have normal level 1, normal attack speed ratios. Second thing was noticing, hey, a bunch of these champions have really slow missile speeds, so it makes them very annoying to lane with. It's harder to last hit. It probably shouldn't be. Maybe you should have an intentionally slow attack animation. This is like Karthus auto attacks and Fiddlesticks auto attacks. Yes, this is intentionally slow. They should be because you don't really auto attack. Fine. But the missile speed shouldn't be garbage, so that it can at least feel pretty good to have a good missile speed. Okay, that's fine. That's reasonable. We can do that. That's not a problem. Then there's a set of champions where we think it at least makes sense that you run an attack speed chart. So like Kennen and Nico and Orianna and a bunch of champions like this where they have literal attack speed hooks on the kit. These champions have elevated attack speed ratios as a way to say that attack speed should have outsized impact on the champion. We're not really expecting Nashor's Tooth Kennen to take off or Nashor's Tooth Orianna to take off, but there's at least an obvious reason to run this stuff. So go ahead and have it. You can have it. Here you go. Go ahead. This is yours. Go have your elevated attack speed. And so they kept good ratios. But if you didn't have an attack speed hook, we tended to want to get rid of that and get rid of the bonus ratio because you shouldn't have a fast ratio for no good reason. While looking at it, we also saw that a lot of these champions who didn't have attack speed hooks, this is champions like Ahri or LeBlanc, it's like they have no attack speed hooks, and yet they are choosing to run attack speed. They shouldn't have to need to run attack speed. They shouldn't want to. Nothing in their kit says you should run attack speed. And so for a lot of these champions, we tend to say, okay, well, we're going to give you some free attack speed. This is going to be just directly power. We know there is a power budget here. We are trying to limit the win rate magnitude to only 1%. If they get more than that, we are very likely to nerf them down to some degree. I think it is reasonable to say we gave you some attack speed. We're going to nerf your spells a little bit. We're going to nerf you in a different direction. I think that is reasonable to do because I think the feels are worth it. But that's why we kind of went low magnitude here. But we don't affect every champion in the game. there are some champions who run attack speed shards, but like they already have good level 1 attack speed. So like Victor's a champion where he actually already has like good level 1 attack speed. Like Victor and Vladimir and a couple of the champions like this, like already actually really have good baseline. I think Vladimir, I think I already said that one already, actually already have the stats actually pretty good level 1. And so a lot of champions were skipped over because they actually already look good. Anyway, let's talk about the various champions. So Ahri is a champion out of nowhere with no basic attack speed synergy on the kit, has a really, 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 really elevated attack speed ratio. She shouldn't have this. This is part of just like making sure our underlying champions make sense. She shouldn't have this really, really high attack speed ratio. That said, she currently does have this level 1 attack speed. We're not trying to just nerf Ahri. The point is not to make mages feel worse, so she's going to keep level 1 attack speed, but she's not going to have this inflated ratio, which means her incentive to run attack speed has gotten lower. Now, because this is mathematically a lower attack speed ratio, her attack speed growth goes up to compensate, and it very, very slightly more than compensates for this. Also, she's getting the new modern attack speed wind up. So functionally, if you don't run an attack speed shard, you have a slightly snappier attack animation. It's very, very light. I mean, it's obviously a very, very small change. And every level beyond level 1, you actually have more attack speed as well, which will compound with this. All of which is to say you should be less likely to need the attack speed shard on Ahri. In fact, the shard itself is nerfed on you. I have a data table on that. So here is Ahri with no stat shard. This is not accounting for the attack animation being a little bit faster. It's, again, pretty small, right? It's 0.1% compared to 20%. So it's, what, 1/200th? It's not a lot, right? It's 0.5%. So, imagine this being 100% is, times, 1.005. Cool. Here's the actual difference in attack frame snappiness for Ahri. Okay? Cool. We can do it here too, right? Okay. Here is the attack frame snappiness for Ahri before and after the changes. If you don't run a stat shard, you just have a 0.5 to 1.2% snappier attack frame. In addition to the fact that your literal attacks per second are going to be, up to 0.7% higher, right? This is your attacks per second before and after. I guess we can leave the attacks per second the way they are. This is attacks per second before and after. This is the attack frame snappiness, right? It's a little bit green. It's not a really big deal. If you run the attack speed shard, your attacks per second are worse, right? They are worse for a very, very long time. If we get rid of the multiplication over here, you can see that it takes a while for this to actually catch up. But eventually, theoretically, level 14, the attacks per second from this growth buff catches up. But really, let's be clear. Oops. Your attack frames are lower, but hey, your attack frame is snappier, and so even if you are running the AS shard, you will have a little bit of gains here. But the point is you're not meant to need it. You're meant to have good attacks no matter what, and you're not meant to need the attack speed shard. Go run AP. It's also worth noting for every one of the champions that I've checked, the win rate of the ability power shard is higher than the attack speed shard. On Ahri, on LeBlanc, on all of these champions, the ability power shard is a winninger rune. You should be running these. You should be running this rune. So please go do that. You will actually win more games because you'll hit a wave clear breakpoint or a trade breakpoint or whatever. This really does have an impact. We then have smaller ones like a Nivea. A lot of champions have exactly this change, where we didn't change the attack speed growth or their attack frame or the missile speed, but they gain this amount of attack speed. It is 5.28% more attack speed. That is the number here, right? So, some champs got very, very little, like Ahri, and then some champs got 5%, 5.3% level 1 bonus attack speed. This did not come out of budget anywhere else. We did not lower their attack speed growth. They just have free attack speed. Congratulations. Here's a free buff. Okay, great. Annie gets to go up to a normal attack speed ratio. We are not expecting Nash's Tooth Annie, but again, Annie is an old champion from 2008, realistically. I assume she just had an attack speed ratio somewhere, and it never got changed. And to me, she does not have a railgun, she does not have a sniper rifle, she is a girl throwing a fireball. I'm pretty sure Annie has been in League of Legends longer than her canonical age. You know what? You've learned how to throw a fireball. It's fine, okay? You have a regular attack speed ratio. I don't care. That said, again, we're kind of limiting our power budget here to 5.3%. So what did I do? I didn't raise level 1 attack speed by more than that number. How much more attack speed does Annie get? Technically a little bit more. It's 5.4%, okay? I rounded up a little bit. I don't care. She's getting the basic attack missile speed as well. This will help her feel a little bit snappier in terms of being able to last hit with right clicks. What this will do, actually, I think this is actually going to be a very, very small nerf in terms of her ability to harass under a turret, because the missile is going to reach her target more quickly, which means she's going to pull turret aggro more quickly, which means she has to be careful about not getting hit back by the turret as often. But again, in any farming role, it's going to be a little bit easier for her to last hit with auto attacks. Her attack, again, is meaningfully faster, the tune of 5.4%. That definitely matters. If she's running the attack speed shard, it's actually even nicer, because keep in mind, her attack speed ratio got buffed by even more than level 1 attack speed. So unlike the other champions, Annie is actually, well, ironically, more incentivized to run the attack speed shard than before, although, oh well. Again, she has an auto attack replacement in her Q, so I think she doesn't really need it, because she can just simply spam Q on minions to last hit them, and it shouldn't be that big of a deal. Next is Cassiopeia. She gets some missile speed. Great. Heimerdinger gets that exact same 5% attack speed increase and the 0.5% attack windup buff. This, of course, compounds to be pretty decent. Right, if we take this and we times it by 1.005, it's a 5.8% snappier auto attack. So Heimerdinger's auto attacks are 5.8% snappier. That's kind of nice. Cool. Ivern is mage-like, decided to include him. His auto attacks are going to feel a little bit nicer. He is a champion who conventionally auto attacks as part of his pattern. Marksmen have way better windups than this. We are not trying to bring mages up to marksmen. We're just trying to bring them up to a respectable baseline. Most of the champions do not have like big slow weapons. There's no Mordekaiser mace here. There's no railgun. They can have acceptable windups here. They're mostly just throwing a moat out of their hand. To me, this is totally reasonable to give them 20%. Also, Ivern has an extra auto attack animation we brought in there. Should be fun. Should look cool. Okay, great. It is like sort of lunge forward thing. I might be trolling and actually already had this one, but it's not what I noticed when I was looking at him locally. Either way, he's got 2 auto attack animations. Basic attack wind up, 3% faster. Great. And it's really, 3 of 20%. So it's like if we, consider it's like 15% faster, right? It's going to be quite a bit nicer. I misclicked. 50% faster windup is definitely going to be feelable. This champion will feel a lot better to auto attack with. Doesn't affect his jungle clear, obviously, but okay, great. Karthus gets the missile speed on his basic attack. Again, not meant to be a really, really big deal, but okay, great. This is actually one of the champions where we didn't elect to improve his basic attack frame because he has an attack replacement, but if he does attack missiles faster, congratulations. Next one we're going to do math on is LeBlanc. We had nerfed these aspects of LeBlanc back in 0.19, the Worlds patch, because we were very afraid of pure AD, Shiv, Trinity Force, Hullbreaker, Split Push LeBlanc. By nerfing her total attack damage, by nerfing her mana pool to make her rely on mana items again, and by buffing her AP ratio substantially, we have once again reintroduced the gap between AP LeBlanc and AD LeBlanc. AP LeBlanc is pretty decent. However, right, because she has some base stats that are still pretty bad from the AD hangover, AP LeBlanc can still use buffs. These are actually meant to be larger buffs than other champions got. And so, this is not going to be a ton of power, but not a ton of champions got the 5% level 1 attack speed, and she got a bit more than that as well based on the math here. So let's talk about what happened with LeBlanc here. Right, okay. So LeBlanc, if you aren't running the attack speed shard, is getting that same 5% or whatever level 1 attack speed, right? That same 5.3%. But because her ratio is getting returned to normalcy, despite this AS growth being lower, this maths out to being more attacks per second gained. For comparison, when she used to be 625, this used to be 1.4%. And she was getting a free like 0.1% AS growth and that same 5.3% level 1 AS that we gave to other mages like her. Because her AP ratios all got buffed over the last couple of patches, and because she has really good level 1 AS now, she should not need the AS shard anymore. She can gain a lot of win rate off of players switching over to the ability power shard. LeBlanc is one of the very biggest AS shard users who don't need it in modern League of Legends. Just that swap itself should give you a meaningful amount of win rate on this champion. Your attack per second should be high enough that you don't need to run it anymore for auto attacking, for trading, for whatever. You will gain a lot out of getting just the spell power. But look, if you do run the shard, because we did bring her AS ratio back to normalcy, the attack per second gained from the attack shard is of course quite a bit higher, because again, the the ratio is not nearly so bad. So if you are going to convince yourself to start with the attack speed shard, you're still getting 8% higher attack speed on this champion. That is, of course, a meaningful win rate gain, of course, as well. Though, again, I urge you, you really don't need to. You can go ahead and run ability power. But this, of course, should be a rather large win rate gain to this champion. So this is kind of round 2 of AP LeBlanc is still kind of bad. Go back to having normal auto attacks now. Lissandra gets a very small amount of attack speed growth. She already has very good level 1 attack speed. She is a champion who currently runs, so she has level 1. She has good level 1 attack speed. Currently runs the AS shard, doesn't have a reason to, but because her level 1 AS is already good, her missile speed is already good, her attack frame is already good, we picked something else. Now we could have done the Ari thing where I believe Lissandra's AS ratio is elevated. I could have normalized it. I just didn't. Maybe I should have scoped it up and done that here. But giving her some AS growth as like another way of saying, look, you know, the game is not just about level 1. The game can be at level 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 in your trades as well. So if you're going to feel it at like level 4, maybe that's enough to get you off the shard. Like, please don't run the shard. Just run ability power. It's going to be better for you. Just do that. So it's a very light touch here, but it's you know, 0.14% for 17 levels is still a decent amount here. It's not huge. This is probably the smallest buff of any of these buffs, but it is a buff. Speaking of small buffs, again, attack wind up on Nico. She has a very, very high AS ratio. She has not at all inflated level 1 AS. I think that is reasonable for the champion to run the AS shard. It is a kit hook for this champion. Like, I'm just going to, in all these cases, assume this was intentionally done. Nico has inflated AS ratio. She has good attack speed growth. But hey, let's make the wind up a little bit snappier so that you shouldn't maybe, if you don't care about auto attacking, you shouldn't need it as much because your attacks will come out on time and the auto attacks can feel good and you don't need it quite as aggressively. Orianna already has good numbers across the board on this kind of stuff. Has a better than normal AS ratio. She does have her passive, of course. But just bringing up the missile speed a little bit here, even just having a good missile speed means that the amount of time between you right-clicking and the damage being dealt is going to get shortened a little bit, which, you know, lowers the incentive to hasten other parts of the attack animation. It's very, very light here. This is actually the actual smallest buff here of all these changes, but it's there. Rumble has a pretty bad attack windup. That's going back to normalcy. To be fair, it is big, clunky mech robot. This champion really could have had a longer windup, though as an occasional Rumble player myself, this attack feels really bad. And so I felt this was one that was reasonable to buff up. I think it was reasonable. Him, you know, pivoting his mech. Like, he doesn't really have like really long animations here. Like, there is some kind of like, you know, lever arm pivot stuff here, but like, I don't know. I don't think this one needs to really, really feel slow. And so I included it as one of the buffs. Rise, another champion who doesn't have any AS energies, but runs AS quite a lot. So level 1 AS for you. Singe just, again, has below normal AS ratio and AS. Level 1, bringing that up to normalcy. His attack windup is very, very slow. I think it's actually a really big feels hit. Last hitting with right clicks on Singed really, really sucks. And considering that his poison is not reliable last hitting, him actually having a good attack frame is pretty valuable. So, you know, he's getting a decent, this is like 2%, by the way. It's like a pretty small, but he's getting like 2% bonus AS and a like, what, 20% almost faster animation. That's a really big deal. This will do a lot for the feels of last hitting on Singed. I could really see this actually being a meaningful win rate because if the auto attack itself is 20% faster, this will just give you more last hits. Like, this has a lot of value. So I'll be interested to see like how much a really elevated windup does for this champion. I think it'd be interesting to see what happens here. Syndra, same boat as Rise and everyone else. Level 1 AS, she's running the charge, shouldn't need to. Here you go. Talia, same boat as well. Teemo gets a faster attack windup, gets a better missile speed. Teemo does have a pretty slow attack windup, so he gets that missile speed. Once again, like with Annie, if you're right-clicking someone under turret, you're going to pull aggro more quickly, so be careful here. TF has a bad windup. Now, TF also prints a bunch of free attack speed via his E, so he shortcuts this pretty quickly. Still, though, doesn't need to have a bad attack windup, so this gets brought down to normalcy. Vigor basic attack, pretty criminally bad. This is, you know, it's not fast per se, but it's like certainly way slower than his Q and everything else, but this is the kind of spell that, yeah, is, or the kind of attack that's just like, it's just really, really slow, and sometimes you have to auto-attack between spells. So here, have some nicer basic attacking, right? Have some nicer last hitting when you can't get it with Q. Okay, great. Vel'Koz, I really cared about keeping up with the whole digits of pi thing. So I would like to answer this one. So Vel'Koz's attack damage growth right now is 3.1416. which is rounded of 3.14159. To me, I feel like it's no matter what you do, you lose, because 3.1416 is rounded and accurate, but it's also not the actual digit of pi. The actual digit is 5 and then 9. And so I intentionally found numbers where I didn't have to round, where it was still in kind of the ballpark here. So of course 159, right, is just 3.14159. This is just going much later because there's a different 6, like 3 series digit that starts with 6 and like isn't 625, but it like would require me to round the third digit or ignore it, and I didn't like either one, so I went deeper down into pi to find ones where I didn't have to round. Anyway, I did this change, and so yeah, he gets a mix of level 1 AS and AS growth, because I wanted to give him kind of a combination. So here's the math on Vel'Koz. He gets only, you know, the 3% level 1 AS, but with the AS growth, he still gets the same, you know, 5 and change that other champions got. If you're in the AS shard, keep in mind I didn't change like the ratio or anything, so you're getting lesser value here. Vel'Koz was an occasional AS shard user, so it seemed like reasonable to give it to him. Xerath mostly gets a much better windup. This is a really, really, really meaningfully faster windup. 20% faster windup is a really, really big deal here. He gets also the 5% AS at level 1. I tweaked his attack animations to now use both of them equally instead of 3 to 1. So now he's ambidextrous instead of right-handed. I think he's right-handed. Whatever. I just felt like that was worth doing because I was there inside of it, inside that file. But this is going to do a lot for him being able to last hit and right click easily. This will probably be more of a mid lane change than a bot lane change. It is worth noting though that there are some champions where I elected to not include them at all. So one of the key ones that was brought up was Swain. So Swain also commonly uses his the attack speed shard. What I noticed looking at Swain's data is that early attack speed is really, really aggressively bot lane skewed, because bot laners get into a lot of 2-on-2 scraps where like Nautilus or Leona hook each other, and the mages just like, or AD carry sit there right clicking to be part of the fight. When I looked at Swain in mid lane, the win rate delta between like ability power, attack speed, and ability haste were like really, really close together. They were all about the same power level. I look at bot lane Swain, and attack speed is substantially more performant than ability power or ability haste. And it's like, well, I know I'd like to give you better attacks, but also this is going to be strict power positive to bot lane Swain, who already is on the verge of being too strong. And I did not want to be like, here, Swain, have attack speed. Also, I must instantly nerf you, because his win rate's very, very high. That felt kind of bad, and so again, maybe there should be a second round of this, and we should just include everyone else, and just everyone gets 0.658. Like, maybe we should go and look at all the fighters and all the tanks and just bring up champions to a new normal. Might be reasonable to do that, right? Might be a totally reasonable choice to be like, now let's go in and actually make all these changes and put the champions here and do this, but intentionally went kind of low scope, intentionally didn't go after the entire League of Legends roster doing this. It's a little bit of a pilot program of like, how does this work? How does it feel? And is this good for the game? And I think it'll be fun, right? People looking forward to it, but, you know, we get to imagine the results having affected only like 17 champions. We only go about 10% of the roster, and then we'll see what happens. One more to Zilean, gets 5% attack speed, also gets missile speed. Really, really big deal for his ability to last hit. This is very meaningful. I think it's to be quite a bit of power. Zoe gets the same level 1 attack speed buff there as well. So, woof! Whole suite of champions, whole bunch of champions getting some changes. Some of them very small, some of them very meaningful. But that is the rundown on those guys. One more systems update. We actually intended to do a much larger sort of overhaul on how vision lingers, but we have limited engineering resources, and those folks are busy with things that are more important than like small sort of slightly annoying vision rules that like aren't incredibly important to update. But what was easy to do was this one, which is there is no good telegraphing over how long and how you reveal yourself when attacking from Fog of War. And the degree to which you betray your teammates, and just overall, it's like this system is not very clear, and it's like pretty much impossible to optimize around. And so can we clean the system up a little bit to make it a little bit more intuitive? It's not meant to be hugely like far reaching in terms of its impact on the game, but just to make the game a little bit more intuitive so that you're not like randomly betraying yourself because you couldn't have known otherwise. So the primary change is the reveal circle is getting reduced from a very, very long 4.5 seconds to only 2 seconds. So if you attack from brush, or you attack a swept ward, or you attack from over a wall, you are only betraying the area around you for 2 seconds. Now, that is more than enough time to see that you got auto-attacked and go over and go Jax Q the Quinn or the Teemo or whatever. Easy to do this. The other thing is, of course, the radius of the reveal. This is how likely are you to betray your team? The core example here is like, my team's going to go do Baron. I'm going to go kill the ward in front of Baron. And, oh, by the way, we have to wait practically an eternity to do anything about this. Not ideal. And so it's like, hey, if we can tighten up these rules and make, you know, the reveal duration a little bit longer than the time between level 1 auto attacks, okay, fine. If we make the reveal duration still a good amount of, like, the brush that I'm in gets revealed, but, like, maybe not the entire thing, I am less likely to betray my teammate, but I'm certainly still going to be targetable. Those are the numbers I was going for. We had these numbers in playtesting since August, and this is not noticeable in a meaningful way in terms of, like, people feel weird, the attacking someone out of a brush, weird surprise of someone being there. Nothing out of the ordinary has happened here. This is just like a nice little minor rules update that should do very, very little. It's worth noting that, like, this 2-second reveal duration is such that any good top lane, like, ranged champion wants to step out of the brush to do it anyway. Like, if you're playing Jace appropriately, you auto-attack from outside the brush that you can walk into the brush to drop minion aggro. That doesn't change when these numbers get smaller. It is still always correct to walk out of the brush, take your trade, then walk back in. Because then you can still use the brush. So for everyone who's like, oh my gosh, dude, I already hate these ranged top laners. Well, ranged top laners are all elite skewed anyway. And elite players literally don't use the mechanic. This doesn't affect them in any way. So it's like, I guess this makes low elo ranged top laners slightly better. But, like, none of them are good anyway, so meh? Seems pretty safe to me. Anyway, that is that change here. Ping changes, more, allowances coming in here within a few seconds of getting a takedown, more allied ping showing up, a revert of the ping lockout timer from a few patches ago, and if you're spamming alert or any missing, only 3 in a row with this one. I'll reiterate what was said in a previous video, which is the, like, multi-year standing survey data around how communication tools feel spiked obviously positive when these changes started coming in. If they didn't spike positively, if we didn't have very obvious results from our players saying that the game, like, this is not, to be clear, like, this is not directed questions, right? This is just like, hey, we ask players every single patch, how do communication tools feel? As, like, you know, 1 through 5, how did communication feel in your last game, basically? And it's just like, always a 2.1, and something becomes a 2.7. It's like, well, these are not the real numbers, by the way, but it's just like, we didn't change the survey. We didn't change the methodology. We didn't change anything except that the literal game is different, and it does this, and it goes here. Guess what? The perception of communication has been better. So guess what? Seems to be positive for our players. Seems to be positive for our players at large. Great. You can type Karthus ult if you need to, by the way. It's not hard. You can type if you want. Anyway, next month's adjustments, bunch of stuff. There's some bug fixes and whatnot. Oh yeah, quick play's coming out. This is super hype. I'm really excited about quick play. It is basically blind pick, but you pick your champion before champ select and get in the game right away. I think it's really exciting. I think it's really, really cool stuff. You can also do global language selections in a few days. This will be exciting as well. Billing shop rotation, bunch of bug fixes and QL stuff. Okay, cool. Let's run a TLDR on patch 13.22, shall we? Let's do it. Alrighty, first up, Brand is getting buffed, primarily in jungle and mid, but this will buff support as well. More damage on his E, especially on rank up, and a bit more damage on his passive. The passive damage buff will more than make up for the 5 damage loss on rank 1 E. His first clear will be faster, and all late game Brand damage will be stronger. But the hope is disproportionately to jungle and mid lane. Briar is getting nerfs aimed at disproportionately hitting lethality builds, base damage down on Q, armor shred down on Q, and damage down on R, intended to take down almost 2% win rate on this champion, especially targeting lethality builds. That is the hope. Dr. Mundo lost a bit more win rate than we wanted from the previous patches, so we're undoing part of the nerf to his E bonus attack damage. Gragas' permanent CC high haste builds are entirely illegal, so we are changing the cooldown refund from flat to %. If you don't have an absurd amount of haste, this is a strict buff to your champion. We're also making the R a little bit faster. TLDR, if you're playing Jungle Gragas and playing his normal builds, you will not feel this as a nerf until literally 4 completed items, which most games do not reach. This is just strictly a Gragas buff to his most common role and most common build. Graves with a very small nerf to the armor of quick draw. Keep in mind, if you are good at Graves, you will retain your stacks between camps, and thus overall have much more bonus armor. And so this stacks up to 8 times, so it can be up to a 16 armor nerf. And keep in mind that bonus armor affects pet damage, which is pretty meaningful there as well. A large kit update to Janna. She has better auto attacks, and she converts bonus move speed into bonus damage on basic attacks and her W. TLDR on the math is late game auto attack damage is better. Early auto attack damage is very lightly worse. Howling Gale has a bigger mana cost, a bigger cooldown, and less damage when fully charged. Zephyr has a lower cooldown, a lower mana cost, and early game less damage, but late game more damage, with a lower cooldown, lower slow duration to go with the lower cooldown. Though keep in mind, you now always keep your W move speed, but you no longer get the move speed when facing your allies. And instead of going on cooldown when W is on cooldown, going away. Eye of the Storm is no longer giving bonus heal and shield power on CC, but instead going to refund part of its cooldown when you land CC. Cooldown is going up as a result, and the base shield is going up as a result, which roughly treads water with these changes. The big change, though, is that you no longer get heal and shield power into your R, which, of course, does matter here. Regardless, mana costs are better. Shield duration is shorter, but no longer decays, which should be overall a buff to the shield. Kassadin was micro-patched early on in the previous patch. Just want to give a quick update that we will intend to nerf him in 13.23. He is definitely overperforming in elite level play. Kassadin was a big winner from the anti-snowball updates, and so getting some gold scaling nerfs on E and R. This guy has some of the best gold scaling in the game, and it's going down some. Nilah, another big winner as a late game carry, got a lot from anti-snowballing, and so it's a bit less late game attack speed and some lower AD ratio on the R. Total damage still going to be pretty good, but going to be lower and scale less well with gold. Happy to slightly lower the degree to which you should play towards bot lane. If we give you less gold scaling in bot lane, it's more likely you play towards mid or top. Very light, but directionally trying to do that. Rammus gets plus 10 armor, which is really 13.5 to 17.5 armor on his W, because this multiplies in. Overall, safety in the early game, good anti-armor, but a little bit less gold scaling. Senna gets 0 to 20 off the base damage of Q and 0 to 20 off the base shield of the Q as well. Keeps the same ratios, keeps the same lethality scaling, all this stuff. Still, though, AP meaningful to lethality, to all the Senna builds. Definitely impactful here, definitely matters. Seraphine is getting a reshape from AP ratio to level scaling on the passive. If the numbers are chosen correctly, this actually is a buff to support in mid and a nerf to bot lane. If they're off, it's going to be always a buff or always a nerf. High Note getting a revert to a buff that made the cooldowns on rank 1 through 4 better. And Surround Sound, via its new shorter cooldown, it's getting an AP ratio nerf commensurate with the cooldown buff that basically raised the AP ratio per second on W. This is now relatively flat to before. Seraphine gained a lot of power in the last patch, and she has to lose some. Tahm Kench gained a lot of power in the last patch and is getting half of the buff of the bonus health ratio of the Q reverted, or the passive reverted. Ziggs gained a lot of power with the ratio buff. The radius buff on his Q. That buff ended up being mid lane skew, which is good, but now we need to lower some more power in bot lane, so going after some of his base armor. There's a whole bunch of attack speed changes to a suite of mage and mage-like champions. It is a set of better level 1 AS, sometimes better attack speed growth, and faster attack windups, or sometimes faster missile speeds on the auto attacks itself. TLDR, Ari has about 1% faster attacks if you don't run the attack speed shard, and negligibly unchanged attacks if you run the attack speed shard, since her ratio got lower. Anivia gets 5% attack to level 1. So did a lot of champions here. Anivia got 5% attack to level 1. Annie got 5% attack speed at level 1. Also faster missile speeds. Also better ratio, that shouldn't really matter. Shouldn't be running anything here. Cassiopeia got missile speeds. Heimerdinger gets 5% faster attack speed and 0.5% faster attack animation. Ivern gets a solid 6% faster attack animation. Karthus gets some missile speed. LeBlanc gets 5% faster attacks level 1. And functionally, this is actually about 0.1% attack speed growth. So a pretty meaningful bump in attack per second for LeBlanc, although she's still keeping the mana cost and AD nerfs that affected her and nerfed her AD builds back 4 packs ago. 3 patches ago, whatever. Lasana gets some attack speed growth. She already has pretty good level 1 attack speed. Nick gets a faster attack windup. Orianna gets faster missile speed. Rumble gets meaningfully faster attack windup. Rise gets level 1 AS. Singed gets new baseline AS speed, AS ratio, or level 1 AS and AS ratio. And also meaningfully faster attack speed windup. Senna level 1 AS, Talia level 1 AS. Teemo gets better attack windup missile speed. TF gets better attack windup. Veigar gets better missile speed. Vel'Koz gets some more AS and AS growth, commensurate with Digits of Pi, because of course, Xerath gets way faster basic attack frames, as well as nicer level 1 attack speed, so this is actually a lot of power. We probably should, we'll have to nerf Xerath's result here, that's fine, we can do that. Zillion gets way better missile speed, as well as better level 1 attack speeds, which you feel a lot better about last hitting. This should be a pretty big deal for Zillion mid. And Zoe gets 5% attack speed here as well. One final system change to Summoner's Rift is when you attack from Fog of War, the reveal radius and the duration of that reveal is much less punishing, so you're much less likely to betray your teammates who are just simply walking by you after attacking a ward or something. Softening some of the ping changes and ARM adjustments and such, all that stuff. The only thing I want to point out is quick plays coming out, and this is going to be super exciting. Very excited to play this. All right, thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.